2016 Harvard University study, a 2019 Johns Hopkins study on mortality, that modern medicine, medical error, is the third leading cause of death. So when you start to think that modern medicine is the third leading cause of death, right? I mean, it kills more people than morbid obesity and diabetes combined. Only cancer and cardiovascular disease kill more people than modern medicine. When you start to think about that, it's so shocking until you add the fact that it's the industry that is designed to prevent death is the third leading cause of death.
Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have Gary Brecka. After spending 22 years as a mortality expert in the life insurance industry, predicting when people would die to the nearest month, now helping people really expand their lifespan, and co-founder of 10X Health System and world-class human biologist. Gary, thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't express my gratitude enough.
Yeah, I'm psyched to be here, man.
Really, really grateful for your time. I know when you grew up on a large tobacco farm and really far away from a lot of people. Your dad was a Navy captain and your mom was a flight attendant.
Yeah.
What early on, what like life lessons really brought you down this path to begin with? Because it's profound what you're doing in this world. And I'm curious how you got into this industry to begin with.
You know, it's so funny. I spent, and by the way, I took a methylene blue troche. So have you seen my tongue is blue? My teeth are blue. I forgot about this podcast, and I took the troche this morning and did some red light therapy. And then I was like, oh God, I'm going to look like a clown on this podcast. I'm a big believer in methylene blue, by the way. Dude, my parents owned several agricultural acres in the middle of a massive tobacco farm in Southern Maryland. At the time, it was the highest cash crop. We didn't actually farm the land. You know, my father was in the Navy. My mom was a flight attendant, but we leased it agricultural. And so I spent most of my summers as a young boy, cutting tobacco. And if you've never actually cut tobacco or you don't know anything about it, it is the hardest manual labor you will ever do in your life. It's cut by hand with a machete, and then you lay it out in these fields, and you have to cut it in the middle of August. So it's actually the highest heat, time in the summer. And you have to wear long sleeves because the gum on the tobacco gets in the hairs on your arms and all over your legs and your fingernails everywhere. And then you got to climb these 60-pound tobacco sticks 5-6 stories up in the air into these tobacco barns to hang them. And they're not exactly designed by OSHA certified engineers, It's the barn rafters roll around and you're up there near the hot tin of the roof and it's just blistering hot. And I didn't know any other way. So that's how I earned money in the summer. And it was actually a great, way to grow up because I think it taught me a level of work ethic. My father, being a Navy captain, was a disciplinarian, and you could set your watch by him. He ate breakfast at 6 a.m. or 0600, he would say. He ate lunch at noon. He ate dinner at 6 p.m. I always said, Dad, you'd be the easiest guy to put a hit out on because you're in the same exact place at the same exact time, every day. But it was a really great way to grow up. I grew up in the outdoors. I'm on our 50-acre ranch right now in Picken, Colorado. I'm completely off the grid here. We have a wood-fired stove, wood-fired hot tub, solar-powered electricity, even well and septic, glacier-fed spring water. And, I think now a lot of days, a lot of kids aren't really growing up with any kind of connection at all to nature. I would leave the house at 7:30 in the morning on my bike. It was a 5 or 6 mile bike to my best friend's house. I didn't really think anything about it. And we spent all of our time outdoors. I spent BB guns trying to shoot frogs in the stream and trying to catch snakes in the brush. And then we would duck hunt in the season. And so it was just an amazing way to grow up. And I was always fascinated by nature. And I spent a lot of time out in Mother Nature. And I also spent a lot of time alone because I'm an only child. And back then we didn't have cell phones and social media. So I spent quite a bit of time by myself outdoors. So I've always been, had a fascination with Mother Nature. And the one thing that I knew growing up was that I did not want to cut tobacco and I did not want to farm. So when I went to school, I started really excelling in science. I found out when I was in the 8th grade that I wasn't partially autistic or idiot savant. I was clinically photographic. And so I have a clinical level of photographic recall, which is a blessing and a curse. I can't read for pleasure. I record everything that I read, and I can assimilate voluminous amounts of information. So it really lent itself to science and chemistry and things that were required high levels of just rote memorization. In fact, all the time in high school and college, I would get accused of cheating because I would take tests and I would flip tests over and I would write notes on the back of tests. I would write all the physics formulas that I might need during a test for a physics test. And I remember one time in high school, I'd gotten a high 90s on a physics exam, and there was a big giant 0 on my test when the professor came by to pass everybody's tests out, and I had a big giant 0 on there. And when I saw him after class, I brought the test to him and I said, "Why did you fail me?" And he said, "Well, because you cheated and you're not allowed to you can't bring the formulas into class for a test. You have to know those." And I said, "I didn't bring those formulas in. I flipped my test over at the beginning and I wrote them on the back in case I needed to reference them." And he said, "So I suppose you could do that again right now in my office." And so I said, "Sure, give me a piece of paper." And he gave me a piece of paper, and I recreated all of the formulas that I had written on that test exam. And he was astonished and gave me back my grade, like a 97, 98, whatever it was. And then he really encouraged me. He was so enamored by the fact that I was able to recall this information. He started asking me a lot of questions, and he really encouraged me to go down the science route. And so I became interested in biology. I went to undergraduate for biology. I got my first biology degree. And then I went to graduate school for human biology, which was another 4-year focus just in human beings. I had 9 hours of cadaver anatomy lab, every week. And I was just fascinated with the human body. And at the time, at this National University of Health Sciences, I was the only student that the dean had ever authorized to teach anatomy classes while I was still taking the course. So I've always had just an amazing fascination with the human body and its form and its function and how it operates. And, after leaving graduate school, I went to work in the life insurance industry in a very special division of life insurance called life settlements, which is where, if we get 5 to 10 years of medical records on you, or 5 to 10 years of demographic data, the team that I was associated with could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And every time I say that, I get so much flack because people are like, "Well, if you could predict life, you'd be Jesus, or you would have won a Nobel Prize." But the truth is, it's some of the most accurate science in the world. If you think about life insurance companies, they take risk that no other financial services enterprise would take. No venture capitalist, no investor, no hedge fund, no money manager, no financial advisor would ever take that amount of risk on a single variable, one variable. When a life insurance company issues 10 million or 25 or $50 million worth of risk on your life, only one thing matters, not where you are on an actuarial curve, but your specific mortality. And the science of specific mortality is some of the most advanced science in the world. Unfortunately, the database that I had access to will never see the light of day. If it did, it would permanently change the face of humanity. It would upend modern medicine in a way that would be catastrophic. And by that, I mean that insurance companies have data that no other clinical study has, the government doesn't have, the CDC and the FDA don't have, research universities don't have, no medical enterprise has. And that is that they know the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 370 million plus lives. So when you know the day, date, time, location, and cause of death, you can triangulate that back into a medical record, back into the lineage of pharmaceuticals, back into the early onset pathology and disease that slowly manifests itself and, eventually ended up in somebody succumbing to that condition. And, what was striking to me about being in that industry and reading medical records 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for decades, was that the majority of the reason why people are not living healthier, happier, longer lives are what I call modifiable risk factors, right? So if I had just been able to contact that patient, which I was prohibited by law,
Yeah.
it was actually a felony for me to contact them. Even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I could not warn the patient, could not even call the physician and let them know. And I saw this over and over and over again until one day I just woke up and said, what am I doing? I'm not contributing to humanity at all. I've been convinced, I've been brainwashed that this is just data. It's not just data. There's a human being on the other side of this spreadsheet. And while I may not be able to impact lives here, if I was to leave this industry and do something on my own in the wellness space, I could take this knowledge and use it to impact lives and help people, live healthier, happier, longer lives. We know a 2016 Harvard University study, a 2019 Johns Hopkins study on mortality, that modern medicine, medical error, is the third leading cause of death. So when you start to think that modern medicine is the third leading cause of death, right? I mean, it kills more people than morbid obesity and diabetes combined. Only cancer and cardiovascular disease kill more people than modern medicine. And when you start to think about that, it's so shocking until you add the fact that it's the industry that is designed to prevent death is the third leading cause of death. And it just shows you how misguided we are in terms of how we manage people's state of being optimal. We're excellent at crisis management, right? I mean, I'm not anti-modern medicine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I believe in actual vaccines. I don't believe in mRNA gene experiments, but I do believe in vaccines. But when you hand to modern medicine, the opportunity to make human beings more optimal, this is where we really fail. And so I left that industry, and I'll never forget the day I walked home, came home and came into the house. I was engaged at the time, now married to that woman, Sage Workinger, who's my partner in 10X Health, along with Grant Cardone and Brandon Dawson. And I walked into the house and I just said, babe, I quit my job today. She was like, what? I said, yeah, I quit my job today and I want to open a wellness franchise. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we have so much information. And I've been running these data experiments, going into people's medical record and artificially, manipulating some of the data. Like, what if I fixed the vitamin D3 deficiency? What would happen to their life expectancy? What if I fixed the anemia, which would have been very easy to fix? What if I contacted the patient and said, hey, stop taking folic acid, start taking methylfolate? What if I was able to just put them on a simple amino acid to control their homocysteine and we could get rid of their blood pressure? It's adding on average 7 to 7.5 years to these people's lifespan. I mean, and this is not just years to their life, this is years to their health span. And so I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not licensed to practice medicine, but I'll find a physician that is, and a like-minded physician, and help train them. And we're going to go out and start changing lives. And, much to my chagrin, she was like, let's do it. She was in the real estate business, and we sold our primary residence. We opened up in a little strip mall with in an old vitamin shop next to the busiest LA Fitness in the country in Naples, Florida. And we started looking at these 74 biomarkers in the blood, and we started looking at 5 genetic markers of what's called methylation, which I can talk about. And based on those 2 pieces of data, we started, and we got a physician and a PA that were licensed to practice medicine. And we started treating patients, and the business just absolutely exploded. And about 4.5 years into that journey, we were introduced to Grant Cardone. And for anybody who doesn't know Grant Cardone, he's a billionaire real estate investor, self-made guy, lost his father at 10 years old, overcame drug and alcohol addiction, was homeless at one point in his life, and has now built a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, and goes around the world teaching people how to do the same. And we got introduced by a mutual friend, and he reluctantly did this gene test that I wanted him to do. And I'll never forget the day that he called me, because he said, and if you know Grant Cardone, you know that this is exactly how the phone call went. But he called and he said, listen, man, this is Grant Cardone. He goes, Gary, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. But before you start, I just got to let you know I did this as a favor to a friend, and I got doctors hanging on trees, and I got personal trainers coming out of my ass. So, by the way, those are the exact words. And he goes, I got about 10 minutes, man. Why don't you give me your spiel? And I was like, wow, aren't you rude? You know, but I said, look, Mr. Cardone, why don't we start by you telling me how you feel? And he said, I feel great. I'm running around the world. I'm building my empire. I feel great. And I said, well, do you mind if I tell you what I see in this test?
Mhm.
And he said, no, go ahead. And so I said, well, I see a man that goes to bed exhausted, but his mind keeps him up until the wee hours of the morning. So that by the time you wake up in the morning, you're more exhausted than when you went to bed. And I said, you know, I can see that you wake up sore and achy in the mornings like you had a workout the night before when you haven't. And I bet it really bothers you that the soles of your feet and your ankles hurt when you get out of bed in the morning to walk to the bathroom and take your first piss. And then he started to get really quiet. And I said, look, I don't know anything about your love life, but libido left the building about 9 months ago. And if I was to guess, the thing that bothers you most right now is brain fog. He was like, what? What do you mean, dementia? I said, no, brain fog. You get a great idea in the bedroom. By the time you walk to the kitchen, you wonder what the heck you're doing in the kitchen. And then he got really quiet, and then he got mad, and he said, who told you to say that? Did Elena tell you to say that? Did Jared tell you to say that? You know, all these people that were close in his orbit. And I said, no, you know, I'm not allowed to talk to you about your medical records without your permission. And he said, you could really tell all that from that gene test? And I said, yes, sir, I can. And he goes, can you fix it? And I said, yeah, I can. He said, how long will it take? I said, 4 to 8 weeks. And he goes, all right, here's my credit card information. I'll do whatever you say for 4 to 8 weeks. Just ship it to my door. And he hung up the phone. And 3.5 weeks later, he called the office back, and I took his call, and he was like, hey, Gary, it's Grant Cardone. He said, I got to tell you, man, I feel great. He goes, I have the energy of 10 men. I haven't slept in 15 years. I'm sleeping 6-7 hours a night, 6 days a week now, without waking. He said, I don't have an ache and pain in my body. I'm chasing my wife around like a high schooler. He goes, that brain fog you talked about, it's gone. And he's like, your shit works, is his exact words. And he said, if you can be in my office at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon, I'll make you a rich man. So, guess where I was at 2:00 the next day.
Right there.
And he ended up acquiring my company, making my wife and I partners, and that is the platform for 10x Health. And now the idea is to spend the balance of my lifetime getting this information to the masses.
Wow. Your story is profound, and you're doing such an amazing job at spreading the knowledge and in the stuff that we really are, for the most part, not aware of, it seems, right? Like when you were in that industry, you weren't able to really say anything about what was going on, even if it was, it would help a lot of people. And then you moved down this path, and now you're helping so many, and being in service in such a profound way. Knowing that when you jumped into working with him, like, what are some practical things that we can do to get ahead so that it doesn't get to a point where it's too late?
Well, the truth is, there's so many amazing like biohacking tricks out here. This is my hydrogen water bottle right there. See it making hydrogen. But there's all kinds of biohacking tricks out there, and modalities, and red light therapy beds, and exosomes, stem cells, and all kinds of things. But the truth is, as I travel the world and I meet with some of the top anti-aging PhDs and MDs and the people that are doing real research on human beings, you find that most of this research and analysis is getting back to the basics. The further away that we get from the basics, the sicker we become. So optimal health is not really found in some like rare Amazon root that's only owned by one company that's patented and licensed it and skinned and boiled and dried, and it's in a capsule that'll restore cognitive function and fight disease. The truth is that our state of optimization in human beings is usually being withheld from us because of certain nutrient deficiencies in the human body. So in other words, if we understand the premise that there's not a single compound known to mankind, not one, there's no vitamin, no mineral, no amino acid, no nutrient, no protein, carbohydrate, nothing that we put into the human body that's used in the format that we put it in. In other words, everything that enters our body goes through a process called methylation to be converted into the usable form. Your body does this about 300 billion times every day. And so it's just like we pull crude oil out of the ground, but you can't put crude oil into your gas tank, right? Because crude oil has to be refined into gasoline. Now the car can understand that fuel source. Human beings are no different. This refining process is called methylation. And there are several genes, 5 that I prefer to look at, that determine what raw material you can convert and what you can't. And when your body cannot make a certain conversion, for example, you can't convert folic acid into methylfolate, which is the only form the body recognizes, then you have a deficiency. It is this deficiency that leads to the most common ailments that we face as mankind. Everything that we chalk up to a consequence of aging or our environment or stress or a spouse or a career or a boss or any number of other things, they're not consequences of aging at all. They are consequences of missing raw material in the human body. And most people, we wander through life and we never get data on our body. Like we have, I talk to lots of young entrepreneurs. I mean, Grant's whole 10X movement is about building your business and scaling your business. And most of them, when I talk to them, they know their income statement, their balance sheet, their P&L. They don't know the foggiest thing about what's going on in their body. They have no idea what supplements they should be taking. They're supplementing for the sake of supplementing, but not supplementing for deficiency. You want to see magic happen in the human body? Start supplementing for deficiency rather than the sake of supplementing. Because the one thing that people get lost on when they get online is they get lost on the quality of a supplement or the caliber of the manufacturing or the quality of the raw material or somebody else's anecdotal story. And the truth is that the biggest fallacy in modern medicine is that what goes into my body and your body and everybody else listening to this podcast body is treated exactly the same way. Nothing could be further from the truth. So if we start with the premise that people should get data, there's one test I think every human should do once in their lifetime. It's called a genetic methylation test. Don't have to do it through me. There's tons of genetic companies out there. And you cheek swab it, you send it into a lab, it sends you back, and it tells you exactly what your body can process and what it can't. And when you start supplementing for those deficiencies, magic things happen. I believe that the majority of us, 90+% of us, are walking around at about 60% of our true state of normal. We have forgotten what normal really feels like. To have really clean, clear waking energy, to have really sharp cognitive function, to have really deep delta wave of sleep, to have a healthy response to exercise, to have really clear short-term recall, to be dealing with things like anxiousness, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, all of these issues that we call mental illness, which I hate that term. I prefer the term mental fitness. The majority of these can be traced back to simple nutrient deficiencies in the human body. And so, whenever I get a chance to talk to people, I try to give them some tips that they could do the next day in their life without spending a single penny to completely change the trajectory of their life. We have at 10X Health, we have a protocol called the Superhuman Protocol. It's an pulse electromagnetic field mat, a PMF mat. It's an oxygen device that you breathe high grade oxygen, and it's a red light therapy bed. It runs about $140,000. You can get exactly the same benefits for zero by getting back to the basics. So in other words, if we started our mornings, the 3 things that I really recommend people do is learn how to do breath work and combine breath work with sunlight exposure first thing in the morning. There's the saying that I coined that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. In 22 years of mortality research, we did not find a single disease etiological pathway, not one, that did not have its roots in a lack of blood oxygen or was not exacerbated by poor oxygen transport. And sedentary lifestyle now is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. Sitting is the new smoking. And so if we developed a disciplined morning routine, short little morning routine, you can still journal, you can still pray, you can still meditate. But if we started to tie our circadian cycle to the wake sleep cycle of the sun, you would see a profound increase in your focus and concentration and your cognitive output during the day. So if you started your morning, which I have an 8-minute breath work routine that I do, it's a Wim Hof technique. I didn't coin it. He's the father of breath work. Consists of 3 rounds of 30 deep breaths, followed by an exhale and a hold as long as you can to raise your carbon dioxide levels. Carbon dioxide, contrary to popular belief, is the major vasodilator in the body. It's not nitric oxide. It's not these nitric oxide supplements that bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts take. In fact, those are terrible for you. They downregulate your mitochondria. It's nitric oxide. So when we do 30 breaths and then we exhale and we hold and we allow that nitric oxide to build up, our vascular system starts to naturally dilate, and then we start to breathe again. And we fill the bloodstream and the tissues with oxygen. We can actually change the oxygen tension in our tissues with breath work. It takes 8 minutes. It will elevate your mood. It'll improve your emotional state. It'll make the body very inhospitable to disease. And then if you can follow that by exposing as much skin to first light, the first 45 minutes of the day, there's a very special type of light called first light. There's no UVA, there's no UVB rays. So no harmful, damaging rays for the skin. You can still make vitamin D3, and that light passes through your eyes. It downregulates cortisol. It downregulates melatonin. It upregulates cortisol, our sleep and wake hormones. And if we follow that with hydration and supplementation, and then with something as simple as a cold shower or a cold plunge, but everybody's taking a shower, magic things happen in the human body. Aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort. And the more aggressively we pursue comfort, the faster we age. Most people will not just take the advice I just gave, even though it's free: breath work, sunlight exposure, cold showers, and contacting the surface of the earth, called grounding or earthing, because it's free and it's not complicated, and we don't want it to be that easy. But the truth is, we get 3 things from Mother Nature. We get magnetism from the earth, we get oxygen from the air, and we get light from the sun. And those 3 things are so fundamentally important or critical to our state of optimal health that the further we get away from those, the sicker we become. We were meant to spend more than 85% of our time outdoors. We spend more than 95% of our time indoors. We control our environment, we control our lighting, we control our temperature, we control everything. We go from a covered house to a covered garage to a covered car to a covered office, back to a covered garage, back to a covered house. So just by restoring the basics, sunlight, breath work, grounding, earthing is a very real concept. If you think about the last time that you had bare feet touching bare soil like dirt, grass, sand, that was the last time you discharged into the earth. And when we talk about what are the benefits of grounding, why is it so important for us to actually physically come in contact with the surface of the earth? Well, because human beings build up a charge. We know that pH, being acid or alkaline, we know that being slightly towards the alkaline scale is a much healthier state. It's a disease-free state. It's a very inhospitable environment for cancer. And so how do we change the pH of the blood? Well, it's not by drinking alkaline water. That's the biggest marketing myth ever sold to the public. The way you change the pH, which stands for potential hydrogen, is you change the charge in the body. And the fastest way to do that is contact the surface of the earth. So by earthing, grounding, breath work, sunlight exposure, and cold showers, just those simple additions to your morning routine will cost you 0. They will completely change the trajectory of your life.
It's so profound to hear this kind of stuff because it's the simplest things that we tend to avoid to do that'll have such a massive impact on our life. Like, what's the difference between starting, say, someone that's in their 20s comparative to someone that starts doing this kind of stuff in their 50s and their 60s? Like, how much of a difference or does that really make on someone's lifespan or just their health?
Massive. I mean, we know that we get the expression of disease decades after it starts, right? Cardiovascular disease doesn't just creep up one day and somebody have a heart attack. Alzheimer's just doesn't pop in one day and somebody begin to lose access to their memory. Osteopenia and osteoporosis, brittle bone disease, you just don't wake up one day and your bones are brittle. And I could we could go through thousands of different conditions where this is true. Some of the largest studies ever conducted on children say, so goes puberty, so goes the adult. So in other words, if you're like a morbidly obese child and you go through puberty as a morbidly obese pubescent teen, and you emerge from puberty as a morbidly obese teenager, your likelihood of beating obesity for the balance of your lifetime is greatly diminished. And so the earlier you start, the better. And so, when I say back to the basics, there's one piece of data that I think every human being needs to get, so that we can stop supplementing for the sake of supplementing, and we can start supplementing for deficiency. And that is the genetic test, because we believe falsely most of the time that disease is passed from generation to generation. Right? I mean, we all know somebody that has high blood pressure, hypertension, or hypertriglyceridemia, hypercholesterolemia, hypothyroid, or drug and alcohol addiction, depression and anxiety that tends to run in families. But because these conditions run in families, does not necessarily mean they are genetically inherited diseases. In fact, I spoke at to a very large group of physicians at St. Regis in Deer Valley. And I asked an entire room full of physicians, I said, by show of hands, how many of you right now are treating patients for genetically inherited disease? Things like hypertension, hypothyroid, drug or alcohol addiction, depression, anxiety, hypercholesterolemia, all these conditions that run in families. Every single hand in the room was up. And I said, well, if you're treating patients for these genetically inherited diseases, understand that we've mapped the entire human genome. So we know every gene in the human body. Can any of you tell me what gene causes any of those diseases? And every single hand went down. And I said, the reason why you can't tell me what gene causes those diseases is because in the majority of the cases, that gene does not exist. What we pass from generation to generation is the inability for the body to refine a raw material, which causes a deficiency, which leads to that disease. And that deficiency can be fixed, right? So the first thing that we need to do, if you want to go next level, is you have to have data. You can't run a company without an income statement, a balance sheet, a P&L, a profit, an idea of whether you're profitable or hemorrhaging cash. And the same thing is, we can't really run our metabolic health, and we really can't treat the temple the way it needs to be treated unless we have some data. That's a test you do once in your lifetime. You never repeat it. You can do it on kids as soon as they can chew and swallow. You can do it on adults in their 90s. And it will tell you exactly what raw materials your body is deficient in. And then you can go about supplementing for those deficiencies. And that's when magic happens. Because if you look at the genesis of a lot of things that young entrepreneurs that are probably listening to this podcast deal with, in their minds, they're like, I'm not worried about Alzheimer's, dementia, heart disease. That's 20, 30, 50 years down the road. But the truth is that we all have these little anchors off of our stern, right? We have a little bit of attention deficit disorder, we have a mild amount of anxiety, we have a little bit of anxiousness, we have some trouble controlling our emotional state, we have some fogginess with short-term recall, or we have some brain fog, we're not sleeping as deeply as we could. And all these tiny little anchors eventually start to drag the boat to a slow crawl. And when we look at these kinds of conditions, take attention deficit, for example, a lot of young entrepreneurs have ADD or ADHD, but it's actually not an attention deficit at all. It's actually an attention overload disorder, right? It's people that have ADD or ADHD don't lack the ability to pay attention. They lack the ability to pay attention to so many things. And there's a difference, because in the human brain, we don't just create thought, we also dismantle thought. And it is just as important to be able to break thought down as it is to create thought, or you have too many windows open. And this is what we call attention deficit disorder, but it's really an attention overload disorder. And if we look at the root of what's causing this, it's an excess of something called catecholamines in the brain. These are fight or flight neurotransmitters: ephedrine, adrenaline, dopamine, norepinephrine. And when we don't downregulate these, we start opening all of these thoughts, right? And so we're thinking about a job we're working on, and our friend walks up, So we're thinking about a job. We start talking to our friend, and while we're talking to our friend, we notice a logo on their jacket, which reminds us of a vacation we want to take. So now we're thinking about a job, talking to our friend, looking at the logo, thinking about a vacation we want to take. And, and then you're not paying attention. Your friend goes, hey, my grandmother passed away on Sunday. And then you go, that's a great idea, right? Because you're just not tuned in because it's too many windows open. So modern medicine says if the mind is racing, let's pump amphetamines into the body to race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind, which is a horrible idea. Right? That's what Adderall, Vyvanse, a lot of these medications are. They're amphetamines, they're stimulants, central nervous system stimulants. What if we just put the right amino acid balance, trimethylglycine, the right complex of B vitamins, the right form of B12, methylfolate into that person's body so they could start to break down those neurotransmitters at the right rate, and ADD and ADHD would eviscerate. This is why a lot of people will say things like, I work really well under pressure. When you say you work well under pressure, what you mean physiologically is I lack the ability to set priorities internally. So I use external pressure to set my priorities. Imagine how much additional stress that adds to your life. And so many people are suffering from anxiety, from anxiousness, even from mild states of depression and mood numbness. And they're not going to the root of how mood and emotional state are created, which are actually created in your gut, right? 90% of the neurotransmitters are not in your brain. They're in your gut. If you don't have them here, you can't have them here, right? It means it's astounding to me that we still define depression in this country as an inadequate supply of serotonin, right? So if you're low on serotonin, you're by definition depressed. Well, if the definition is low serotonin, then wouldn't the fix be to raise serotonin? But that's not what we do. We take people with low serotonin and we put them on SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what they do is they take a depressed person and they basically ration what little serotonin this person has. And so by definition, they never raise serotonin. So by definition, they never end depression. But if we understood that serotonin was made in the gut, 90% of it's here. And if we could just turn that serotonin factory back on, meaning the conversion of the amino acid tryptophan into the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is done through this process of methylation, then we would have adequate levels of these neurotransmitters. And we wouldn't have the gut issues and we wouldn't have the emotional issues. This is why I always prefer to talk about mental fitness rather than talk about mental illness. I feel like I just went way down the rabbit hole on you. So.
No, I don't ever apologize. I love it. I think we need to hear this kind of stuff because it's so true. Like I work with entrepreneurs, really helping them overcome procrastination. And the reason that the procrastination sticks around is because they're trying to address the procrastination and not the core, the actual reason why they're procrastinating. And it's like the same thing for anxiety or depression or anything that we're doing is we're going to the surface level problem and not the core of where it's or why it started to begin with. And there's a part of you said something in another podcast that your emotional state determines your memories you access, and they determine your conscious like projection of the future.
No
How can
question.
we just get more control over our emotional state? What are some things that we can actively do?
Well, first, understand that the half-life of your negative emotions is directly related to your level of success. So the longer the half-life of your negative emotional state, the more negative of an impact it will have on your success. We know now we have equipment sensitive enough to measure hormetic responses in the brain. We know there's a study, a 2016 study by MIT, that essentially proved that the emotional center of the brain, which is called the amygdala, where we experience joy, elation, arousal, passion, anger, resentment, libido, where we feel all of our emotional states, is the sole gateway to our memory, which is the hippocampus, which means the only way to access your memory is through your current emotional state. And if we understand that the hippocampus, where memory is stored, projects into what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is our conscious state, and our consciousness is our future, then this means because emotions determine memories and memories determine conscience and conscience determines our future, this means that your current emotional state determines your future. So the greatest thing that you can master as a young person, not just an entrepreneur, is how to control your emotional state. Tony Robbins talks about, you know, changing your state. And he uses things like outbursts or even breath work, which is one of the best. I mean, when you feel yourself being overwhelmed by a certain emotional state, if you will just stop and do a catecholamine breathing method, which is 2 short nasal inhales followed by an oral exhale. So like this. They call this natural Xanax for a reason, because it down regulates the catecholamines in the brain and it collapses that hyperexcitatory state. I do this with fighters right before they walk out to the ring. I work with several of the top UFC fighters in the world, several of the top boxers in the world, a lot of top athletes, and even somebody that's been in the octagon dozens of times. Before that walkout and before that experience, they're amped up and they have high amounts of adrenaline, they have high amounts of dopamine. They're starting in a fight or flight mode, and by bringing that down, it just returns them to a calm, centered state. But the first thing that we need to do is make sure that our body has the raw materials to make the neurotransmitters that create mood and emotion. And very often, the supplements that we're taking are having the polar opposite effect on that. So, for example, 44% of the population has a gene mutation called MTHFR. It is affectionately called the motherfucker gene. I did not coin that, but yes, MTHFR. It actually stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. But this gene, very common gene mutation, is an inability to convert folic acid into methylfolate. Now, that might not sound like a big deal until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. Folic acid, by the way, is also an entirely man-made chemical. You cannot find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. It doesn't occur anywhere naturally in nature. We make it in a laboratory. So how can something that's man-made in a laboratory that didn't even exist until the 90s, how can this be essential to optimal health? It's not. And 44% of the population cannot process it. But if you don't know this, then you don't know to avoid folic acid-laden foods. Most people think they're allergic to gluten. They're actually allergic to folic acid. And the truth is that folic acid is in all white flour, all white rice, all white bread, all white pasta, and all grains in the United States that are not organic. We don't call it sprayed with folic acid. We call it fortified or enriched. That's what those two terms mean. Fortified whole wheat or enriched bleached white flour, fortified bagels, enriched bagels, fortified or enriched pasta. All of this stuff is a disaster for somebody with that genetic mutation. In fact, it is the leading cause of postpartum depression in pregnant females. Because what do most OBGYNs tell a pregnant female to do as soon as she gets pregnant? They tell her to take high doses of folic acid. Well, 44% of women have a gene mutation that doesn't allow them to process that. So now you put 1,700% of the daily allowance of folic acid into somebody's body that can't process it, and they go nuts and they become depressed. And then eventually the pregnancy ends and they stop taking the prenatal vitamin and the symptoms go away. So they blame it on the pregnancy, not on the vitamin. The same thing happens with young children. If it's a full contact sport to get your kid in the car to go to school in the morning, it's likely because you're feeding them folic acid, and there's a 44% chance they have this gene mutation. And when you feed them white bagels, white Pop-Tarts, cereal, toast, all the things that we feed kids, part of the standard American diet in the morning, the next thing you know, their little minds are racing. They go nuts, right? I mean, folic acid can be like cocaine for a 6-year-old. It can just make their mind race. And it's astounding to think that this could be coming from simple things like our diet. But this is one of the reasons why I tell people that they need to get data. And once you have it and you supplement for deficiency rather than the sake of supplementing, now you actually have a roadmap to optimal health. Because you can get online and you could convince me that this NMN supplement and this NED supplement and then this resveratrol supplement and this mix of psilocybin and mushroom supplement and then this multivitamin and this ashwagandha, and all of these things are great. It's not that they're not. The question we should be asking is, does our body need it? And if so, in what form? And give the body the raw material what it needs and just get out of its way. I remember when I was in grad school, it was funny because I was getting my postgraduate human biology degree, and I had to take all these plant botany courses. And I'm like, I hate this stuff, like, and but I'll never forget that it doesn't matter what goes wrong in a bush, shrub, tree. If you call a real botanist or an arborist out to look at what's going wrong, and you have rot going on in the leaves or some kind of decay going on in the leaves, they won't touch the leaf. They will core test the soil. And the first thing they'll do is they'll look at the nutrients in the soil and they'll say, there's no phosphorus in here. There's no nitrogen in the soil. They add nitrogen to the soil, bang, the leaf heals. Because if you deprive that tree, that bush, that plant of certain raw materials, you get the expression of disease. And this is what happens in human beings. And just because you are disease-free, meaning you don't have type 2 diabetes, you're not morbidly obese, you're physically fit, doesn't mean that you're mentally fit. And it also doesn't mean that you're living in a state of being optimal. One of the most common things I hear all the time from clients of mine is like, oh my God, Gary, I feel amazing. And I'm like, not to burst your bubble, you don't actually feel amazing. You just feel normal. And that's how normal is supposed to feel, right? God gave us everything that we need to thrive. But when we're deficient in vitamin D3, we get the consequences of that. When we're deficient in methylfolate, we get the consequences of that. When we're deficient in certain classes of B vitamins, you get the consequences of those deficiencies.
Again, it's profound to hear you speak and to talk about this kind of stuff, because I mean, like you said a minute ago, it's like the average American diet when for breakfast, like eating a Pop-Tart or eating cereal or eating the things that just do terrible things to our body in the long run. It's insane to really take into perspective how simple the things we need to do to really optimally show up for ourselves and create a longer lifespan. I know you say that sitting is the new smoking, and I'm
Yes.
someone that I don't remember the last time I didn't hit 10,000 steps in a day, because I prioritize walking so much. It's something I tell everyone to do, is go on a walk, because it's had such a massive impact on me.
Yeah,
Why is
what's so
sitting the new
amazing
smoking?
is I think walking is so overtly simple that it's just completely overlooked and given up
Yeah.
on as a possibility for, achieving a state of optimal health. I mean, walking is one of the best exercises that humanity can do. And, when I wake up here, I'm completely off the grid here. If it wasn't for Elon Musk and Starlink satellite, we wouldn't be having this call. But I wake up in the morning, I have a cup of black organic coffee, um, and I use the David Goggins method while I'm sort of debating about whether or not I want to walk. I'm putting my running shoes on, and while I'm considering how cold it is outside, I just walk outside. And then the next thing you know, you're walking, and and then it's too late, and then I never regret it. I do, 25, 30 minutes down the mountain, then do another 25, 30 minutes up the mountain. Um, and we're at 10,500 feet. By the time I get up here, I feel amazing.
Yeah.
And then I go about my workout and the rest of my day. But it is astounding, how the aggressive pursuit of comfort is leading to the acceleration of age. Like, we have got to stop telling grandma not to go outside, it's too hot, not to go outside, it's too cold, just to lay down, just to relax, just to rest, to eat at the very first pang of hunger. This is destroying our natural defense mechanisms. There's a process in the human body called hormesis, which is where you apply a stress and the body strengthens and responds. And we know now that muscle is actually our metabolic currency. It's actually one of the best indicators now of longevity. And we also know that if you don't apply certain stressors to the body, it weakens, right? If you don't load your bones, they don't strengthen. If you don't actually tear a muscle, it won't grow. And if you don't challenge the immune system, it weakens. This is why you see the repercussions from the pandemic are not actually from the pandemic itself. It's from the global collapse of our immune system. Residential quarantining, masking, social distancing. I'm not trying to make a political statement here. Some of the worst things that we ever did to humanity, right? We took human beings out of contact with other human beings. So what happened to our immune system? It collapsed. And then when we popped the cork off of the restrictions, and now you're hearing about monkeypox and the eighth variant of Omicron, and like, I'm like, monkeypox? Who ever heard of freaking monkeypox? Oh, just came in after COVID. No, it's always been here. We just weren't susceptible to it. And so a lot of what's missing from society is that we have lost the impetus to really, challenge ourselves. Most people won't take my breathwork advice because it's uncomfortable to do breathwork. You get lightheaded. They won't take cold shower advice because it's uncomfortable to take a cold shower. Um, and they won't, get first light because they're too tired to wake up first thing in the morning. And so the consequences of those come, further in life.
Yeah. And it is like you said, the David Goggins kind of mindset is like you wake up in the morning, you don't feel like going on the walk, but it's usually the things that we don't feel like doing that we never regret doing after we've done them. And
Yeah.
it's that kind of stuff that's so powerful, that is so intentional. And you say that the aging is the progressive pursuit of comfort. And I know that you said in a different podcast actually that there's nothing that comes close to cold immersion to stripping body or fat off a person's body. And I
There's
find
no,
that profound. And I think that a lot of people, this whole podcast is really about breaking through beliefs, and you're breaking through so many paradigms of the world of health and everything. Why is that true, and how is that so impactful for our life?
so let's kind of start at the top down with cold water immersion. First of all, water is 29 times more thermogenic than air, meaning it
Hmm.
removes heat from the body at 29 times the rate of air, right? You can die in 72-degree water. You cannot die in 72-degree air, right? Because your body can maintain that thermoregulation. So remember, we are not trying to become cold adapted. We are trying to cold shock the body, right?
Mm,
So it's almost like if you came home every day and your wife was hiding around the same corner every day and went boom, every time you walked in the same door, she was in the same place. Pretty soon you desensitize to that, right?
right.
You're like, I already know you're there. So prolonged cold exposure is not what we're after. People ask me, what should the temperature be? How long should you be in there? 48 to
Mhm,
50 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 minutes minimum, 6 minutes maximum. There's virtually no evidence that colder is better or longer is better. I mean, I see a
mhm,
lot of dangerous things going on social media where people will actually get in 37-degree water with a snorkel, and they'll go underwater and they'll breathe through a snorkel for 10 or 12 minutes. You got to remember that your brain is a quarter of an inch inside the surface of your skull. It is not good to freeze it, and it is not good to bake it. So the whole idea behind cold water immersion is to shock the body, right? So when you get in 48 to 50-degree water all the way up to your um, clavicles, up to your neck, the first thing that happens is you have a massive peripheral vasospasm. Remember, arteries are smooth muscle. We can condition our arterial system just like we can condition our biceps, right? So what
mhm.
happens is they spasm and they force all that oxygenated blood into the core, liver, lungs, pancreas, kidneys, and they force it up to the brain. The only other time the brain gets this much oxygen at rest is during deep delta wave sleep, right? Because during deep sleep, what's happening is mTOR and all these other pathways that are being regulated. What's really happening is the brain is at rest and it's getting the same amount of nutrients. So if we can force oxygen and blood flow up to the brain, strip it from the periphery, that's the first benefit that we get. Second, you get an endorphin rush. Endorphins are pleasure hormones. And so you get an elevation of mood and you get an elevation of emotional state. The third thing that happens is you activate our thermostat in the body, which is called brown fat.
Mhm.
So when you get in cold water and you bring the body temperature down and then you get out, how does the body temperature return to normal? Well, the thermostat kicks on,
Yeah.
the pituitary kicks on, it starts to regulate your metabolism, it starts to regulate your thyroid function, and it elevates the temperature in the body by activating something called brown fat. And then the fourth thing that happens is you get a release of something called a cold shock protein. And if you want to be fascinated, just look up cold shock proteins. These are proteins, they're reserve proteins, they're in the liver. They respond to cold shock and heat shock environments. They dump into the bloodstream. They help scour the blood of free radical oxidation. They increase the rate of protein synthesis, which is muscle repair. Um, and they're free, and you can access them every single day. And you only need to be in the water for 3 minutes and get out after a maximum of 6 minutes. Um, and so, cold water immersion causes this hormetic response in the body to strengthen, elevates mood, elevates emotional state, puts oxygen into the brain, liver, lungs, pancreas, kidneys, improves muscle repair, decreases inflammation, turns our thermostat on. And then the final thing, and for some reason, this is where I get most of the women to start doing cold plunges.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, men are a little easier for some reason. They're like, yeah, I'll try it, but women are like, I'll just put my finger in, and that's a no. That's how my wife is. But um, you know, if we define what a calorie
Mhm.
is actually a measure of heat. Okay, it's roughly the amount of energy that it takes to raise 1 cubic centimeter of water 1 degree centigrade.
Mhm.
So if a calorie is a measure of heat, then what do you think is leaving our bodies when heat leaves our bodies?
Yeah.
Calories.
Yeah.
There is nothing that will increase your caloric expenditure or help strip fat off your body, in my opinion. Nothing comes close, time minute for minute, than getting in cold water. Um, it can really change your body morphic image dramatically. It can help activate stubborn white fat, and it can actually raise your metabolism, improve your metabolic rate, and therefore improve the amount of fat that you burn. And it doesn't take long at all. If the only change that you made to your exercise and eating regimen, if you only made one change and you added 3 to 6 minutes of submersion in cold water between 48 and 50 degrees, you would see a dramatic shift in your body morphic image by only changing that one variable.
And it's so subtle. Less than 5 minutes, less than 10 minutes a day. It's like it's the easiest things. It's not easy, right? It's the simple things that are hard to do in the beginning, but once
Yeah.
you've done them, it's again
And
the
remember,
things
we're
that
not
work
we're not
the
trying to
most.
become cold adaptive. We're trying to cold
Yeah.
shock the body. That's the reason why the periods of time are short.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those out there, I've lost my father and my uncle both at 37 years old, and my grandfather ended up passing away at 66. So people passing away young has been something that's just happened in my life. Outside of cold immersion and sun and grounding, what is there anything else that you have in your mind that you feel that people need to know about, that they need to take action on to really extend their life?
Yeah, I mean, you should put together a gradual 12-month plan, right? Too much too fast is you don't need to become carnivore or keto or vegan or vegetarian or all paleo or all raw food. I mean, all of those diets have their benefits and their drawbacks. You essentially need to focus on eating whole foods because it's not our the food itself that's the issue. It's the distance from the food to the table. I did a post that I got censored for a few weeks ago about seed oils. And I never said that seed oils were bad. I said industrial processed seed oils were bad. When you take a canola plant and you press it and it comes out gummy and you degum it with hexane, which is a neurotoxin, and then you heat it to 405 degrees and you turn it rancid, and then you deodorize it with sodium hydroxide, and then you bleach it with chlorine, and then you bottle it, and then you put it on the shelf. You now have a rancid, toxic seed oil that is horrible for you. So focus on whole foods. The one place that you want to spend money if you're on a budget, if you do eat fruit, is you want to spend money on organic fruits. Never again eat non-organic fruits. If you look at the studies and the EWG studies on non-organic fruits, you'll find that the level of pesticides in these fruits is mind-numbing, enough that they can actually compress the fruit, take the juice, and respray the crop with that juice from non-organic strawberries because of the pesticide content. And so the one place you want to spend money on in your budget is, if you do eat fruit, have organic fruits. And as you get more money, spend more money on the quality of food that you eat. As you become more successful, reward yourself by eating more clean whole foods, grass-fed meats, pasture-raised chickens, pasture-raised eggs. You know, the the way that food was originally meant and designed to be consumed by humans. The worst thing that ever happened to us was genetically modified foods. So my second um, tip, I guess, would be to get genetically modified foods out of your diet. If you'd like to
Mm.
see the research on GMO foods, you can go to my Instagram at Gary Brecka. And I think in my link tree, I put my entire research library there. But if you are going to start tomorrow making 3 subtle changes: one, eliminate processed foods and sugar, start eating whole foods, whether you are vegan, vegetarian, paleo, keto, or carnivore. The second is to eliminate GMO foods and seed oils from your diet. So, genetically modified foods were not genetically modified to increase the yield of the crop. They were genetically modified to make the crop and the seed resistant to glyphosate. Glyphosate is a weed killer, but it's also a neurotoxin. And so when we genetically modified the seed, we made it non digestible. So we get virtually no benefit from genetically modified foods. There's even some evidence now that because the food was genetically modified, it can cause genetic modifications in the human genome. And this
Mm.
evidence has just emerged in the last 12 to 18 months. The third thing that I would do is wake up tomorrow and never, ever, ever again for the balance of your lifetime drink tap water. If you're on a budget, get a minimum like a Brita water filter or another simple water filter you can get at the grocery store. They're like $16 that at a minimum filters fluoride and chlorine out of your water. Fluoride has always been a known neurotoxin. Only this year did we finally get the release from municipalities on the true studies of fluoride. They studied 3,600 municipalities in the United States, and without an exception, they found an inverse relationship between IQ and the consumption of fluoride. So, in other words, as fluoride concentration went up, the IQ went down. If you want to read the study, that study's also on my Instagram. So again, it's just us getting back to the basics. I'm here in Picken, Colorado, so I have a solar fed electricity. I drink glacier fed spring water. I don't filter it. I actually just put it in a little thing that makes it turns it into hydrogen water. But it's glacier fed spring water. It's I get solar fed electricity. I get natural sunlight out there. I do walks in the woods. I touch the earth and ground. I get in a wood fired hot tub. I mean, those simple things are so incredibly rewarding to restore a state of optimal health. But GMO foods, seed oils, fluoride from tap water, just please get a simple filter. If you want to know the filter that I use, it's also on my Instagram. I don't get a percentage from that. And eating whole foods, no matter what type of diet you're on, make sure that you're eating whole foods. The more you take things out of a package with preservatives, the sicker we become.
Wow. Once again, it's the simple stuff that's just so profound, because even just hearing this kind of stuff, like there's going to be many people that will hear this kind of stuff and do nothing about it because they don't see the detriment now. But it's so
Right.
important to take this in now, because why wait is the question that I ask, and I really think that it's so important to take this into perspective, Gary. There's one
Yeah.
last question I ask every guest, and it really encapsulates what I want to do with this podcast. The question is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
Wow. What belief am I currently unlearning? Um, you know, I think the most um, powerful characteristic that a human being can possess, in my opinion, is an intellectual curiosity. And so I am unlearning the premise that I know and understand everything, especially as it relates to the human body and an optimal health. I have an insatiable intellectual curiosity, almost like a childlike fascination. Um, and so unlearning the premise that because I have so much experience, I'm right and have nothing to learn, I think that's part of the journey that I'm on right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're breaking through barriers day by day, so it's good to keep that open mindset. And I find that almost every single person I've spoken to, that curiosity is such a big aspect of their, not only just their ability to grow, but their success and what they're doing. So, Gary, thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming on the show.
Welcome.
All of your links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.